In today's reading from 2 Samuel, the unacceptable happens. King David, to whom God has provided blessings and wonderful promises, uses his power to have another man's wife and then to arrange for that man's murder. Rulers are not above the law, but David acts as if he is. He acts as if he is autonomous, responsible to no one, not even to God. David lacks faithfulness toward God, toward the law, and toward the people he leads. David's lack of faithfulness is contrasted with the faithfulness of Uriah. When David learns that Bathsheba is pregnant, he calls Uriah back from battle and urges him to go to his wife so that when the child is born, all will think that Uriah is the child's father. But Uriah refuses to go to his wife. Instead, he sleeps in the servants' quarters, which is his way of being faithful to his comrades who are back in battle. The frustrated David then tries a different tactic. He tries to get Uriah drunk so that he will go to his wife. But again, Uriah stays in the servants' quarters. Uriah is a Hittite, not a native Israelite. He is a mercenary soldier. Unlike David, who has been known as a person after God's own heart, it is Uriah the Hittite who unwittingly displays a personal code of conduct that is above reproach. This issue of faithfulness is woven throughout the Bible, which often presents us with a portrait of a faithful God and a less than faithful people. An example of the importance of faithfulness is seen in the Jewish tradition of saying a prayer upon waking up while still in bed, before your feet even hit the floor when you get up. Every morning of every day, observant Jews recite a prayer known as the Moda Ani. I say this every morning. This prayer developed out of the idea that every night as we sleep, we give our tired souls back to God to spend the night for rest. In the morning, we receive our souls anew, refreshed and energized. And the first words said upon waking in this is this short two-line prayer. I thank you, O living and eternal God, for returning my soul to me in mercy. Great is your faithfulness. This proclamation of gratitude for God's faithfulness is one of the first prayers that an Orthodox Jewish child learns. In today's psalm, Psalm 14, we have the lament that everyone has proved faithless by not doing good, proved faithless by acting like King David. We act faithless when we act as if we are autonomous, responsible to no one, with no moral accountability. To act without moral accountability is to be a fool in our hearts, to say, in effect, there is no God. Like David, we mistreat and exploit people like Uriah, who are less powerful than we are, as though there was no God. To act as though there is no God is to mistreat and exploit the less powerful, to eat up people like bread. The psalmist seems to tell us that a moral accountability, a moral autonomy, which disregards the truth of our lives together in community with equity, is the real threat to our faith, not some theoretical, intellectual atheism, the real threat to our faith. It is our actions that show our faithfulness, our actions that show what we truly believe about God. In the letter to the Ephesians today, the author expresses the truth that faithfulness in our inner being will root and ground us in love and fill us with all the fullness of God. Earlier in this chapter from the letter, we read of St. Paul, though the very least of all the saints, being given grace to bring to the Gentiles the news of the boundless riches of Christ. Aware of his limitations, Paul is to preach to all because all are able to be rooted and grounded in love and filled with all the fullness of God. All are able to be rooted and grounded in love and filled with all the fullness of God. Jesus knew that this truth would be lost if he was made king by that large crowd in today's passage. Jesus distributes food to all the people in the crowd. His distribution is not based on virtue of the receivers. It's not based on that. It's based on simple need, the need of humanity. Knowledge informs the seemingly realistic assessment of the disciples Philip and Andrew that it is impossible to feed such a large crowd. But as the letter to the Ephesians tells us, the love of Christ surpasses knowledge. And when all have shared, not only is there enough food, there is more than enough food. Jesus feeds, despite the superficial response of that crowd. Jesus portrays the people experiencing the feeding, but not understanding the significance of the feeding. The people understand only that Jesus has fed them. They do not understand that Jesus is the bread of life. The crowd gathers around Jesus only because of the marvelous signs that he is doing. And after having been fed, they want to make him king so that they can simply sit back and have a perpetual free lunch. What's in it for me is the crowd's attitude. But Jesus, the bread of life, cannot be turned into our errand boy or bottled up like a genie to satisfy our every human desire. When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force and make him king, he withdrew. Because the journey of spreading the good news begins in our inner being. We cannot share what we do not experience. The crowd that wanted to make Jesus their king that day on the other side of the Sea of Galilee was not going to change their worldview and begin to feed each other. They would not have experienced the bread of life and begun to share with one another the bread of their fields. Instead, they would have remained passive. They just wanted to have a king to serve them instead of their serving, the one who is the bread of life, instead of their becoming servants to each other. It's the entire message of John's gospel. John is writing toward the end of the first century AD to people who have lived past the expected second coming, and they are asking, where is Jesus? And John tells the story of Jesus' ministry. And when he's telling the story of Jesus' ministry, he is trying to teach us to recognize the presence of the risen Christ in our midst. And in our inner being, John wants us to know all the fullness of God through the Eucharistic feeding, through nourishment of the body and nourishment of the soul. May we be so filled with all that fullness of God.